She grabbed the wrong invitation and ended up at the billionaire's wedding. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. It all began on a gray afternoon in Manhattan. Rain streaked down the glass walls of the Grand Meridian Hotel, turning the marble steps slick and shining. Ella Thompson pressed a bundle of envelopes to her chest as she hurried along the sidewalk, her sneakers soaked, her jacket 2 winters too old. She had just lost another catering shift and was praying the temp agency would call her back before the rent was due. As she ducked under the hotel awning to escape the rain, a gust of wind blew something across her feet, a cream-colored envelope embossed with gold lettering. It looked expensive, the kind of paper that smelled faintly of perfume and privilege. On the front, in looping cursive, it read, "To Miss Evelyn Hart." Ella frowned. Whoever Evelyn was, she clearly had better luck than most people standing in the rain. Inside the lobby, chandeliers sparkled over marble floors. Men in tuxedos and women in sequin gowns hurried past, clutching identical envelopes. Ella hesitated by the glass doors. Maybe she could hand it to someone at the front desk. Maybe even get a small tip for being honest. But the moment she stepped inside, everything happened too fast. A hotel coordinator in a headset rushed toward her, eyes wide. "Oh, thank goodness you are here," the woman gasped. "They are about to start. The groom has been stalling." Before Ella could respond, the woman grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the elevator. "Wait, I think you have the wrong person," Ella stammered. But her words drowned in the clatter of heels and the hum of a live orchestra echoing from the ballroom upstairs. The elevator doors opened to chaos, flowers, photographers, flashes of white satin. A man in a tailored black suit stood at the altar, every inch of him sculpted confidence and exhaustion. Alexander Grayson, CEO of Grayson Holdings, the man whose face was on half the billboards in the city. He turned as she entered, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met. His expression flickered from disbelief to something that looked almost like relief. The coordinator whispered frantically in his ear, "She made it, sir. We can proceed. It is the day for Miss Ident." Ella froze. "Wait, what do you mean, proceed?" Alexander's jaw tightened. Cameras were already clicking, guests murmuring. If he admitted the real bride had run away, the press would devour him. His company was in the middle of a merger. Scandal meant disaster. So he did the only thing that came to mind. He stepped forward, extended his hand, and said with perfect calm, "You are late, darling." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ella's heart pounded in her chest. She opened her mouth to correct him, but his grip tightened, a silent plea behind his composed smile. "Please," he whispered under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear. "Play along. I will explain later. Just 1 minute, as we have said in good sever das es onces." 1 minute, that was all he asked. And somehow, standing in that golden light, surrounded by strangers and camera flashes, she nodded. The officiant cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" Ella swallowed hard. The orchestra swelled, and the world blurred into a dizzy haze of roses and vows she did not understand. By the time the applause thundered through the ballroom, she realized she had just become Mrs. Alexander Grayson, on paper at least. And that single mistake would change her life forever. The applause still echoed in her ears as Ella followed Alexander out of the ballroom. The air in the corridor was thick with the scent of roses and champagne, but all she could feel was panic pressing in on her chest. She tried to speak, but Alexander was already striding ahead, his expression unreadable, jaw tight as if he was holding the whole world together by sheer force of will. Inside a private lounge, he finally turned to face her. "I owe you an explanation," he said quietly, loosening his tie. The calm in his voice only made her more nervous. "You are not Evelyn Hart, are you?" "No," Ella breathed. "I found an invitation outside. I came in to return it. Everyone just started pulling me around." He exhaled sharply and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Evelyn left. Walked out an hour before the ceremony. The media is everywhere. If word got out, my board would assume instability and call off a $300 million merger." His eyes lifted to meet hers. "So," I improvised. By marrying a stranger?" she said, her voice trembling between disbelief and anger. It was not a real marriage, he replied quickly. The officiant is my company's attorney. It is symbolic. Nothing legal was filed. Ella stared at him, still clutching the hem of her thrift store dress. Then what happens now? Alexander reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, placing it on the glass table between them. We make it real enough for the cameras for a few weeks. You will accompany me to 5 public events. You will wear the ring. You will smile. When the press calms down, we will dissolve the arrangement, quietly. You will be well compensated. Her pulse stumbled. Compensated? How much are we even talking about? Enough to pay whatever debts made you look at that invitation twice, he said simply, his tone precise, surgical. For a moment she could not breathe. He could not possibly know about her mother's hospital bills or the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. Yet something in his voice, detached, factual, made it sound like he did. She sank into a chair, staring at the contract's neat columns of text. Rules, boundaries, confidentiality clauses, a non-disclosure agreement thicker than a book. She felt small, like a background extra in someone else's movie. I do not belong in your world, she whispered. Alexander's expression softened, only slightly. Neither do half the people pretending to, he said. But you did me a favor tonight. Let me do one in return. Outside, thunder rolled across the city skyline. The world beyond the windows shimmered with rain and distant camera flashes. Somewhere out there, tabloids were already publishing headlines about the mysterious new Mrs. Grayson. Ella traced her finger across the paper, hesitating. She had spent her life saying no to scams, to easy money, to anyone who offered help she did not earn. But now, faced with the possibility of saving her mother's life, pride felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. Fine, she said at last, lifting her gaze to his. I will play your bride. For 5 events. Then we end this. Alexander gave a short nod and extended his hand. Deal. As she shook it, her reflection glimmered faintly in the mirrored wall behind him. Her rain-soaked hair, his expensive cufflinks, 2 strangers bound by a single desperate choice. For the first time in her life, Ella felt like she had stepped into a story too big to control, and somewhere deep down, she wondered if she would ever walk back out unchanged. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the glass walls of Alexander Grayson's penthouse. The place looked more like an art gallery than a home, cold, spotless and painfully quiet. Ella sat on the edge of a velvet sofa, holding a cup of coffee she was too nervous to drink. Across from her, Alexander's assistant, a tall woman named Clara, read through a checklist on a tablet. Your first public appearance will be the charity luncheon tomorrow, Clara said briskly. After that, the business gala on Friday and the board reception next week. You will have fittings this afternoon and etiquette training at 6. Do you own any formal wear? Ella looked down at her thrift store jeans and gave a small, embarrassed shake of her head. Not exactly. Clara nodded as if she expected that answer. Then the stylist will bring options. Everything you wear, say, or post online represents the Grayson brand. Do you understand? I think so, Ella murmured, though she barely did. When Clara left, the silence grew heavy again. Alexander stepped out of his office, sleeves rolled up, phone pressed to his ear. His tone was clipped, controlled, every word precise. Yes, I know what the press is saying. Handle it. She is my wife, legally binding or not. He ended the call and turned toward Ella. We will go to the tailor in an hour. Try to act natural. You will get used to the attention. Attention? She asked warily. He picked up the morning newspaper and tossed it onto the table. The front page showed a photo of them at the altar, his hand over hers, her eyes wide in disbelief. The headline read, Grayson's secret wedding. Who is the mystery bride? Ella groaned softly. Oh no, they make it sound real. That is the point, Alexander said, his mouth curving into something halfway between a smirk and a sigh. It needs to look real. The merger will finalize in 30 days. After that, you will be free. Later that afternoon, a team of stylists transformed her tiny frame into something unrecognizable. Silk brushed her shoulders, diamonds caught the light, and her reflection in the mirror looked like a woman who belonged in his world. But inside, she still felt like the same girl counting dollar bills at a corner diner. That evening, as the city lights flickered beyond the penthouse windows, Alexander poured 2 glasses of champagne and handed one to her. To new beginnings, he said. Ella hesitated before taking a sip. You really think people will believe this? He studied her for a long moment. They already do. The only thing you have to remember is that we are partners. Nothing more. Partners, she repeated softly, though the word felt heavier than it should. The doorbell chimed. Clara returned with a sleek black folder. Mr. Grayson, the contract is ready for your signatures. Alexander handed Ella a pen, his voice even but firm. You will sign as Mrs. Grayson for the duration of the agreement. This guarantees your compensation and ensures confidentiality. If you break it, the consequences are serious. Ella's fingers trembled as she wrote her name across the dotted line. The ink glistened for a moment before sinking into the paper. When it was done, he closed the folder and gave a single nod. Welcome to the arrangement. As the city stretched out beneath them, Ella stared at the skyline glowing against the night. She had entered this world by accident, but now every choice tied her deeper to it. Somewhere inside, she wondered if a lie told long enough could start to feel like the truth, and if pretending to be Alexander Grayson's wife would end up changing her more than she could ever imagine. The next day arrived faster than Ella expected. The charity luncheon was held at the Crestwood Hotel, one of those places where even the air smelled expensive. Cameras lined the entrance, reporters whispering like a pack of restless birds. As the limousine door opened, Alexander extended his hand toward her, the picture of calm control. Just smile and follow my lead, he murmured. Remember, this is business. Ella placed her hand in his. The warmth of his palm startled her, steady and grounding amid the flash of cameras. Her borrowed gown shimmered under the sun, every diamond borrowed, every smile rehearsed. Still, her heart beat faster than it should have. Inside, chandeliers cast soft gold light across tables draped in white linen. A string quartet played in the corner. Waiters glided between guests carrying silver trays. Ella did her best to remember Clara's lessons: chin up, shoulders back, small polite smiles. Every time she looked uncertain, Alexander's hand would find hers for half a second, just long enough to guide her through the room. The whispers followed them anyway. Who is she? She came out of nowhere. She looks nervous. A woman in pearls approached, her tone dripping with curiosity. Mrs. Grayson, we have never met. How wonderful to finally see the woman who captured Alexander's heart. Ella's throat went dry. Before she could answer, Alexander stepped in smoothly, his charm practiced but not unkind. She prefers to let her actions speak for her, he said, giving Ella a small, reassuring glance. You will see why soon. And that be eyes and work flayed, crosses well passives. Throughout the lunch, Ella sat beside him, pretending to belong, pretending not to notice the scrutiny. Yet beneath the surface, something unexpected began to shift. When Alexander leaned over to quietly explain who a certain investor was, or when his voice softened just enough for only her to hear, she caught glimpses of the man behind the public mask. Not the ruthless CEO from the headlines, but someone who seemed tired. Human. After the speeches, a waiter tripped near their table, sending a cascade of champagne glasses tumbling. Without thinking, Ella lunged forward, catching the tray before it crashed. The guests gasped. Laughter rippled through the room, and someone began to applaud. Quick reflexes, Alexander said under his breath, his eyes glinting with a rare spark of amusement. Remind me never to underestimate you again. Later, as the limousine carried them back through the city, the tension between them felt different, lighter, almost like they shared a secret. Ella stared out the window at the skyline flashing by. How did I do? She asked quietly. Alexander loosened his tie and exhaled. Better than I expected. The board will stop asking questions for now. You saved us both a great deal of trouble. That was the idea, right? She said with a small, uncertain smile. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned back to the window. You did more than that. Is the cessfurs was were printably in his latter polis, is in text well con. When they reached the penthouse, Clara met them at the door with a tablet full of news alerts. You two are trending, she said, her tone clipped but impressed. Public opinion is turning. The merger looks stable again. Alexander gave a brief nod, dismissing her. As soon as the door shut, silence filled the vast apartment. Ella unpinned her earrings and turned toward him. So, what happens now? He hesitated, his voice lower than usual. Now we keep pretending until the world believes it. Just do not forget what this is. She nodded, though a strange ache pressed in her chest. A contract, I know. They don't made de terror, and was paid de time, in the world realm. But as he walked away, loosening his tie, she realized something had changed and it had nothing to do with business. The way he had looked at her in that ballroom, the faint smile he could not quite hide, those were not part of any script. And for the first time since this all began, Ella wondered if she was the only one still pretending. By the time the second event arrived, a high-profile gala at the Metropolitan Art Hall, Ella had learned how to walk in heels, how to smile without trembling, and how to breathe when every flashbulb seemed aimed at her. Yet as the limousine rolled to a stop, her palms still felt damp. Alexander sat beside her, calm and unreadable, scrolling through his phone. When the driver opened the door, cheers erupted outside. Reporters shouted his name, cameras firing like lightning. Alexander stepped out first, his presence commanding the space as if the red carpet belonged to him. Then he turned, extended his hand toward her, and the noise softened to a collective gasp. For a moment, Ella hesitated. Then she took his hand and stepped into the light. Inside the grand hall, gold chandeliers glimmered over glass sculptures and a sea of designer gowns. Ella moved carefully, following Alexander's lead as they greeted investors and socialites. Every introduction blurred together, but she noticed how he watched her reactions, as though he was silently grading her performance. When a journalist approached them with a microphone, Ella's pulse quickened. "Mr. Grayson," the woman said, "your sudden marriage surprised everyone. Some say it is a publicity stunt. How would you respond?" The microphone shifted toward Ella. Alexander's gaze flicked to hers, steady, reassuring. She took a deep breath. "If this were a publicity stunt," she said softly, "I would probably not be this nervous right now." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. But sometimes life does not wait for perfect timing. Sometimes it just happens. As the journalist smiled, and the tension broke. Alexander's hand brushed against hers under the tablecloth, a subtle thank you. For the first time, Ella felt she had done something right. Later that evening, when the speeches ended and the band began to play, Alexander led her onto the dance floor. His hand rested gently on her waist, guiding her through the rhythm. The lights dimmed, and for a moment the world outside vanished. "You are improving," he said quietly, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I am trying not to step on your shoes," she replied. "You are doing fine," he murmured. "Better than fine." The sincerity in his tone startled her. It was not the polished charm he used in meetings. It was something real, unguarded. She looked up at him, caught in the shadow of his smile, and something in her chest shifted. After the final song, they stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the city. The air was cool, the skyline glittering like 1,000 tiny stars. Ella leaned on the railing, her dress rippling in the wind. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked quietly. "All the parties, the cameras, it does not look like happiness." Alexander's gaze stayed on the lights below. "Because in this world, if you stop moving, people start wondering what is wrong with you. Success demands noise." She turned toward him. "And what happens when the noise stops?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe that is when you find out who you really are." For a long time, they stood there in silence. The sound of music drifted from the ballroom, but it felt miles away. In that quiet moment, with the city glowing around them, something between them softened. When he finally walked her back inside, his hand brushed against hers, again accidental but not unwelcome. And for the first time since their impossible arrangement began, Ella realized that pretending to be Alexander Grayson's wife no longer felt entirely like an act. That night, long after the gala ended, the city outside Alexander's penthouse was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving the streets below slick and shining beneath the moonlight. Ella stood by the window, barefoot, still wearing the borrowed gown. She had removed the jewelry, but the faint imprint of the necklace remained on her skin. Behind her, Alexander's voice broke the silence. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." She turned slightly. He was seated on the couch, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, staring at a glass of untouched whiskey. The exhaustion in his posture was something she had never seen before. "You do not sleep much, do you?" she asked softly. He gave a faint, humorless laugh. "Sleep is overrated when the world expects you to be perfect by sunrise." Inundated. "The best from on the sign, and the bastion has ovalisations. In matters ours apartions." Ella moved closer, hesitant but curious. "That sounds lonely." Alexander looked up, For once there was no shield in his expression. It is. You start thinking people love the name more than the man. He paused, eyes lowering to the whiskey glass. Evelyn was convenient. We both understood the rules, no feelings, no risk. But even that fell apart when she decided she wanted more than appearances. Ella sat down across from him, the quiet hum of the city filling the space between them. So, that is why you needed someone to stand beside you. He nodded slowly. I needed someone who would not ask for anything I could not give. His gaze lifted, meeting hers. You remind me of who I used to be before all of this. Her chest tightened. And who was that? A man who believed people were good, he said, almost to himself. The air felt heavy with words unspoken. Ella folded her hands in her lap. Maybe that man is still there. Maybe he just needs someone to remind him. He studied her for a long moment, as though searching for something he had lost. Then he leaned back, a faint, tired smile crossing his lips. Careful, Ella. You are starting to sound like you believe in me. She smiled, but it did not quite reach her eyes. Maybe I do. For a while, neither of them spoke. The rain began again, tapping softly against the glass. Ella rose to leave, but his voice stopped her. Ella, he said quietly, thank you. For tonight, for everything. She turned back to him, her heart pounding in her chest. You are welcome, Alexander. But do not thank me yet. We still have 3 events left. He chuckled under his breath, but his eyes stayed on her long after she disappeared down the hall. Later, alone in her room, Ella stood before the mirror. The reflection staring back at her no longer looked like the girl who had stumbled into a billionaire's wedding by accident. She looked stronger, surreal maybe. And yet, beneath all the makeup and the designer fabric, she still saw the same woman who had once worked double shifts to afford her mother's medicine. But something had changed, something in the way Alexander had looked at her, not as a pawn in a contract, but as if she mattered. And that terrified her more than any flashing camera ever could. Outside, lightning flickered far in the distance. Ella closed the curtains and whispered to herself, remember what this is. A deal. Nothing more. Still, as she lay awake that night, she could not ignore the quiet warmth spreading through her chest, the feeling that maybe for both of them, this arrangement was beginning to turn into something dangerously real. 2 weeks later, the illusion began to crack. The morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Grayson office tower as Alexander stood at the head of a long conference table. The boardroom was filled with executives, shareholders, and one uninvited guest, his cousin and longtime rival, Nathan Grayson. Nathan leaned back in his chair, a sly smile on his face. You have been busy, Alexander, he said, flipping through a magazine spread showing photos from the gala. Married out of nowhere to a woman no one in our circles has ever heard of. Quite the fairy tale. Alexander's expression remained calm. My personal life is not on the agenda, Nathan. Maybe it should be, Nathan replied smoothly. Investors have questions. They think this marriage is a publicity stunt to distract from the merger leaks. Across the table, murmurs rippled through the room. Alexander's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Nathan slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, grainy images of Ella leaving a diner, carrying takeout boxes, her waitress uniform unmistakable. Seems your new wife has an interesting past, Nathan said, his tone dripping with poison. Did you even vet her? Or was this another one of your impulsive decisions? Alexander's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. Enough. It's all fried by the sass after due, but the damage was done. The whispers grew louder. Someone mentioned background checks. Someone else mentioned annulment. By the time Alexander returned home that evening, his composure had thinned to a thread. He found Ella in the kitchen, helping Clara unpack groceries. She smiled when she saw him, but his face was unreadable. Alexander? She asked softly. What is wrong? He handed her the folder without a word. As she flipped through the photographs, her breath caught. Where did you get these? They were shown at a board meeting, he said flatly. They know everything about your job, your debts, your mother's medical bills. Nathan made sure of it. Ella's throat tightened. So now they think I am some kind of scammer. He said nothing. That silence hurt more than words ever could. You do not believe them, do you? She whispered. Alexander looked away. It does not matter what I believe. It matters what they do. The merger could collapse over this. Her chest ached. So that is it? You are just going to let them decide who I am? He ran a hand through his hair, his calm mask fracturing. You do not understand how fragile this is. One rumor and years of work fall apart. I cannot risk that. Ella set the folder down, her hands trembling. You said you needed someone who would not ask for anything you could not give. I kept my word, Alexander. I never asked for your money, your name, or your trust, but I thought I had at least earned your respect. He opened his mouth, but no words came. She shook her head, her voice breaking. I guess I was wrong. With that, she walked past him, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The elevator doors closed, leaving Alexander alone in the echo of her absence. That night, headlines exploded online. Grayson's marriage a lie? Sources reveal shocking details about the bride's true identity. Alexander stared at the glowing screen, each headline cutting deeper. He could almost hear her voice from that first night. Play along. I will explain later. Another actional bladed for Gim. Now he was the one who owed her an explanation. But when he finally picked up his phone to call, it was already too late. Ella had turned it off. She had vanished from his world as quickly as she had entered it. And for the first time in years, Alexander Grayson realized that for all his wealth and power, he had never felt poorer. 3 days passed. The penthouse felt empty, without Ella's quiet laughter echoing down the hallways. The press would not stop calling. Every news outlet ran the same story: Grayson's fake bride exposed. Commentators questioned his credibility, and investors began to withdraw their offers. The merger was hanging by a thread, and Alexander knew exactly who had pulled it apart. Nathan. He sat alone in his office, staring at the city skyline. The world outside looked as polished and untouchable as ever, but inside, everything was falling apart. On his desk lay the torn remnants of the folder Nathan had handed him. Beside it was a small photograph of Ella, taken by the press at the gala. She was smiling in it, nervous but radiant. Clara entered quietly, holding a tablet. The shareholders' meeting starts in an hour, she said. Nathan will be there. Alexander's gaze stayed on the photograph. Let him. I am done hiding. At the meeting, Nathan wasted no time. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced with mock sincerity, it seems my cousin's marriage was built on deception. The woman he presented to us is not who she claimed to be. The media has confirmed everything. Is this the kind of leadership we can trust? Murmurs filled the room. Cameras flashed. Alexander rose slowly, his voice even but firm. You are right about one thing, Nathan. It was deception, but not hers. It was mine. The room went silent. He continued. I asked her to pretend. I dragged an innocent woman into a lie to protect a company built on truth. She did nothing wrong. She saved me from public humiliation, and in return, I failed to protect her. He looked around the room, his voice steady but laced with remorse. If you want to hold someone accountable, hold me. Nathan's smirk faltered. You are admitting this in front of the board? Yes, Alexander said, because I am tired of living like every decision needs to be perfect. Maybe it is time to remember that integrity still matters more than headlines. When the meeting ended, reporters swarmed the lobby, shouting questions, but Alexander walked past them without a word. For the first time, he was not performing. That evening, he found himself outside a small hospital 2 hours outside the city. The nurse at the front desk recognized him immediately, but he ignored the whispers and asked, Is Ella Thompson still here? The nurse smiled softly. Room 204. She has been here all afternoon with her mother. He climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. Through the open door, he saw Ella seated beside an older woman in a wheelchair, adjusting her blanket. The gentle way she moved, the same kindness that had captivated him from the start, hit him like a wave. When she looked up and saw him, her expression froze. Why are you here? She asked quietly. I came to apologize, Alexander said. I should have trusted you. I should have defended you. And it's feel long. Her mother glanced between them with curious eyes, then excused herself with a knowing smile, leaving them alone. Alexander took a step closer. The truth is out. I told them everything. The merger may fall apart, but I do not care anymore. Ella folded her arms. And what happens when the cameras point at you again? You will wish I stayed gone. He shook his head. No, Ella, you were never the mistake. The lie was, she wanted to stay angry, but the sincerity in his voice broke through the wall she had built. You risk everything for this? She whispered. For you, he said simply. Silence hung between them, heavy with the weight of everything they had not said. Finally, Alexander reached into his pocket and placed a small, torn piece of paper on the table, the shredded contract, now taped back together. It started as a deal, he said softly, but it does not have to end like one. Ella looked at him, tears glimmering in her eyes. Then what does it end as? Alexander smiled faintly. As something real, if you will let it. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe. Maybe the world could rebuild what it had broken. And maybe, just maybe, love could begin where lies had once lived. 2 months later, spring returned to the city. The chaos had faded, the headlines had shifted, and for the first time in years, Alexander Grayson had learned to breathe without thinking of his reputation first. The merger had survived, though barely, and the investors who once doubted him now respected him more for admitting the truth. But for Alexander, victory meant little without the woman who had taught him what honesty actually looked like. He had not seen Ella since that day in the hospital. She had returned to her old apartment, caring for her recovering mother and quietly rebuilding her life. She refused interviews, declined the offers that came pouring in, and stayed as far away from the Grayson spotlight as possible. Until one morning, she received a small white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single handwritten note. There is one last event I hope you will attend. No reporters, no board members, just us. Tomorrow at 6 A.G. Ella stared at the note for a long moment before setting it down beside her mother's teacup. He still writes like a businessman, she muttered softly. Her mother smiled. He sounds like someone trying to write from the heart. The next evening, curiosity and something she would not admit aloud brought her back to the Grayson estate. The once intimidating mansion now glowed with warm light and soft piano music. When she stepped inside, she froze. The grand hall had been transformed into a small, intimate space filled with white lilies and candles. At the center stood Alexander, wearing a simple black suit, no tie, no cameras, no audience. He turned as she entered, and for the first time since they met, there was no armor in his gaze. You came, he said quietly. I almost did not, she admitted. What is this, Alexander? He smiled faintly. Something real. On the table beside him lay a framed piece of paper, the original contract they had both signed, now sealed behind glass. Across the bottom, he had written a single line in ink, from contract to commitment. Ella's breath caught. You kept it. And may Dad. I kept it to remind me what happens when you build something on fear instead of trust, he said. I tore it up once, but I wanted you to see it whole again, just like us. He took a deep breath, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a modest gold ring, simple but elegant. This time, there is no merger, no cameras, no lies, he said. If you say yes, it will be for real. Tears welled in her eyes. Alexander, he stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. I fell in love with you in the middle of a lie, but everything I feel now is the truth. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the piano. Then, slowly, Ella reached out her hand. Yes, she said softly, but on one condition. He smiled. Anything. No more contracts. He laughed quietly, relief flooding his face, and slipped the ring onto her finger. No contracts, he promised. Outside, the rain began to fall, light and steady the same way it had on the day they met. As they stood together beneath the golden glow of the candles, the storm washed away everything that had come before. The lies, the fear, the distance. Weeks later, a quiet ceremony was held by the lake behind the mansion. No photographers, no headlines, just a handful of people who mattered. Clara handed Ella her bouquet, whispering, You finally look like you belong here. Ella smiled. I think I finally do. As Alexander took her hands and spoke his vows, she remembered the moment she had once whispered to herself in the rain. Remember what this is. A deal. Nothing more. But standing there, surrounded by light and truth, she realized how wrong she had been. It had never been just a deal. It had been destiny in disguise. And when Alexander kissed her, it was not part of any arrangement. It was the beginning of everything real.